So today we're looking at some Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, first edition. Evening viewers, and let's get on with this. So after a couple of requests and talking with some people on various fora, I've had a chat with some folks about how experience works and levels and so on. So one of the 2 points of questions that come up are often, well, how do I know if something's balanced, or how do I know if something's going to fit with the adventure and the players? And then there are times when you also look at it and you go, well, how much should I be allocating as experience? Now, for most of the monsters, you're looking at a set value that have already been pre-calculated and so on, and we'll have a look at those in the back of the DM's guide. But what I wanted to do is look at 2 particular charts. The first one is this chart, which is the experience point value of monsters. So when you're working out the experience level or hit dice of the monster, you're using the hit dice of the monster. It's important to note that if you're making up the experience value for a character or something that has a class, so the NPC that the heroes face off against might be a half-orc fighter assassin, then you need to work out how many hit dice, but it's in the next category up. So if an evil half-orc fighter is 5th level, it's treated as a 5 + 1 to 6. So the basic XP value goes from 90 to 150 and is then categorized in that particular row. So what you need to look at is how many special abilities and how many exceptional abilities and so on and so on and so on. So that part is quite sensible in terms of how it works out. But you actually do it for every single ability. So if something's got magic resistance, if something can cast spells, something can turn. So an evil cleric is going to be worth a lot more because they've got a spell casting ability, they've got turning ability, as well as being generally a character. And same thing with magic users, if the magic users have any other protection devices on top. But generally, things like thieves, they may only have a special ability, they get to have thieving skills. Assassins get a handful, because obviously they've got special abilities of assassination as well as the thieving skills. Fighters would generally only gain that special ability once they hit certain levels, because they have the ability to attack at different targets once they get higher up in levels, at 7th level and 13th level. But also they get a special ability to hit everything under to hit their level for less than 1 hit dice. So that 6th level half-orc fighter, which counts as 6 + 1, is 225 points plus 8 points per hit points, and then gains 75 for the special ability of being able, because they get to strike their level times versus opponents of less than 1. So that's an ability. And if you're up against a ranger, of course you've got tracking as well as those other abilities. Paladins, well, paladins well and truly go off the chart with every ability. They've got quite a few of them out there. So that gets added for each one. And you sort of wonder, okay, how much does this point system, what does it equate to? So I end up with a value, and I end up with like 3, an ogre, for instance, which might be 90 experience points, and then plus 4 or 5, whatever it is. We'll have a look in a moment. For every hit point, we'll have an average of 15 to 20 hit points. You could be looking at about 170 experience points for a single ogre. And from that, you sort of go, okay, well, that's a fair chunk of experience points for one ogre, but how does that equate to the rest of the party? And this is where we look at the other chart, which actually doesn't have a name. Of all the charts in all of the books where everything has a name, this one doesn't. So I've just sort of come to calling it and christening it my own name. But hang on a second, let's just pull that up. This particular chart here, we've all seen it, I'm sure. So it doesn't have a name, so I kind of like the name of the encounter determination reward matrix. Work in progress. So what I do with this is, as a relatively experienced DM, I also use this as an encounter or as an overall adventure total as well. If I find that the players were quite well challenged, we work it from there in terms of how it all sort of fits. So looking at this, if you've got an encounter, which may be almost anything, but an encounter that's up to 20 experience points, that's considered a level 1. And if we have a look at the other chart, you'll find that at first level equivalent dungeon, which is a party of first levels, this is what it looks like. And from there we've also got how the other levels of the chart and so on and so on. So what you got to work out is there's a rough idea of what level adventure you're running, which can be an average of all the levels put together. So party of first levels is a first level adventure, which means that Ogre is potentially anywhere between a level 3 and a level 4 threat, depending on how many experience points it's actually worth. That's a single Ogre. And to sort of highlight that, you're looking at an Ogre showing up later in the charts, because they show up in 1 to 3, and if you've got 3 of them, then that's 600 experience points. Now all of a sudden, 3 of them, they can make a mess out of a bunch of first levels, because obviously they do enough damage, they've got a reasonable armor class, and so on. And they've got the hit points to be able to just take a few hits. So what I do is when I create an encounter, and it could be something like, okay, is this a tricky lock? Is this a mighty, is it the chances of finding secret doors, or a general overall capability of the adventure, is it on par? I look to this, and from there create a way of putting it together. So for instance, if I decide, okay, this was a pretty tough adventure, these guys have done a good job in putting it all and coming out and working together, so I put a challenge for a bunch of 4th levels, so 5 4th levels. And I go, okay, well, that's actually worth about 2,000 experience points for all of them. So then they walk out with 500 base experience points. How you manage experience points is entirely in the hands of the DM, and it's entirely up to you. And there's no right way or wrong way, but what they do suggest is that you take into consideration how well the players behave, how well the players act in their character, role-playing as well, obviously, but also just the general playability. If you've got the fighters that like to fight, yeah, okay, that's fine. But if they find new ways to bring the fighter out, so lead the charge, or to rally the troops, that's more fighter and more leadership, which is what we expect from the PCs. We expect more from the PCs than a non-player character. So always remember that. So when we have our monsters, and our humble orc that's worth 15 on its own is worth 1. So it's a level 1 monster. Same thing with goblins and kobolds, and you might have 2 or 3 of those together, and that might still equal a reasonable challenge for a party of 4 or 5 first levels. If you've got 5 orcs, that's a reasonable challenge. An orc taking at least 1 hit still has to be hit. You've got the variabilities of combat across the board, initiative, rolling to hit, and so on. So they're still challenging. And the secondary part of experience points is obviously the amount of treasure. So if you've got a treasure room that's being protected by a dragon, that dragon is going to be absolutely insanely tough. If the players manage to knock it out, they get more experience points for that than if they had to take out. If the dragon wasn't there and then they walked in and just took the gold and walked away. That might be, unless they've tricked it or they've done something specifically to overcome, because you reward the experience points based on how they've overcome it. Quite often with combat, when it's a monster, but sometimes if they trick the monster, that's just as good. When Heracles in his labours, he didn't just go out there and smack. He also did a lot of convincing and trickery when it came to working out what needed to be done for his adventures, and so that was pretty much part of it. And that's how you do it. If for overcoming an encounter or successfully moving through, you totally get that the experience points, even if you don't have to just go in there and hack and slash. So here we have an example of the lines that are in the back of the DM's guide. So we're looking at the ogres and orcs because we like ogres and orcs. They're easy. And we've looked at some of these in the past, and we've looked at how to use some of these charts. But what we're specifically looking at now, as we move across, we're keeping our eye on the ogre. 4+1 for the hit dice. 1 to 10 all by weapon. Important to remember as well, if you choose the weapon, then you add +2 to the damage. So they do 1 to 10 just as a generic club, generic speary type thing, just like a generic weapon. But if you want to give them a specific weapon, so say you want to give them a greatsword, or you want to give them a spear, then you add 2 to the damage. Because in all of these, including their 2 hits, and the damage rolls, their strengths are already supposed to have been factored in. So we come across to this, 90 +5 per hit point, which, because they've got no other special abilities, they've got no special defenses, they've got nothing. So this is what we expect. So here we are back at the encounter determination combat table matrix, I don't know, work in progress, we'll figure out a name. And you can see well and truly that once you start to become an ogre as an encounter, we're heading down the line. So an ogre with 20 hit points, which is the upper end of average, but still in the average zone, it's 190 experience points. And this is where we turn to the next chart, which you have to bear with me. Alright, so from here, we're looking at the dungeon random monster level determination matrix. Yeah, you thought my titles were pretty ordinary. And from here, you can see that at first level, when a random level monster comes up, balanced, 1 to 16 on a d20, is a level 1 monster. Now what constitutes a level 1 monster? And remember, this is for a level 1 party, not just an individual, but a party. So a party is between 3 and 5 characters. Most of this is designed for at least 5, so that you need to remember as well. And the level 1 monster is when you've got up to 20 experience points. So what can be considered a level 1 monster? Well, for instance, 7 to 12 orcs are a level 1 monster. So, a level 1 monster of 7 to 12 orcs with an average hit points of 4, you're looking at 14 points with a minimum of nearly 100 experience points in that encounter. So again, how many characters we're looking at, divided by the number of characters, it works out to be about 5 characters. So as a DM, you need to also factor in scale of balance, which works out to be how many extra units am I going to need to bump it up, to knock it down, to bring it around, and so on. So for instance, if you've got party of 4th levels, if you've got 5 of them, then when you do how many orcs, you have to keep adding orcs until you roughly get to that level of equivalence, which means that they're going to be heavily outnumbered. But by about 4th level, the fighters have got 20, 30, 40 hit points. The thieves are doing well. Everyone is doing well. Magic users are able to hit multiple monsters in the one go, and so on. So it balances out, but you need to make sure that that's all accurate. So this is what I'm talking about when I say the level 1 monsters. Let's get everybody in here. Try and get everybody in here. From the ants down to the zombies. Now this is all using the monster manual. This obviously all before the monster manual 2, and the monster manual 2 has new charts and so on. But this is a great guide. What we've got here is for a party of level 1, 1 to 4 giant ants should be enough to challenge them. 1 to 3 zombies, and so on. How many orcs have we got? 7 to 12. How many goblins have we got? 6 to 15. So straight away you can see how that really manages to stress some characters in terms of their abilities. And these are random encounters. These aren't the encounters that you have planned. This is just, but you use this as an idea of what a balanced encounter should be versus a party. If you assume that the party is truly always on at maximum health and so on, that's where you end up with all these. Because the idea of a random encounter is generally to hit the resources, make them cast spells, make them use potions, and so you want to make sure that even your random encounters are still not so random. So if we have a look at the level 3, straight away you've got new monsters in there, We've got ogres, 1 to 3. That's important. And if you're a higher level and you're going to throw in ogres, then you need to add extra ogres. So that way, as I said before, you can make it up. And if you're a lower level, then you take away an ogre. You might just give them 1 ogre for a party of 5 or 6 first levels. That's going to be enough, because if that ogre hits, generally they're going to kill someone. And whilst we're not really into the killing business, we want to challenge as best as possible. And this is where dragons start to come up as well. So you see they have different subtables and so on. So let's turn back to the monsters for a sec. I have a handful of favourite monsters, especially to be used as bad guys, that can generate a life of their own once you've included them because of various reasons. Dragons are obviously one, demons and devils are another one, but this is one of my favourites, the Beholder. So you'll see really odd in terms of how it's got its to hit, because it runs between 45 and 75 hit points. So how do you work out what level it's supposed to be at? You divide it by 4.4. Or 4.5, sorry. You divide it by the average, and then that tells you what the hit dice would possibly be, and then you can equate that to the combat matrix of a monster. So a 75 hit point Beholder has a to hit armor class 0 of 7. And a 45 has 10. This is a nasty beastie. 1 attack. Oh, only 1 attack? But we all know what the Beholder does. It's got all of these amazing things, and the experience points highlight that. Just want to show that. It's got 10 eye stalks, or 10 ray beams and so on, and everything else. 12,900 experience points base, plus 20 per hit point. That is a challenge for any party. So when a party complain, oh, that Beholder was a bit powerful, wasn't it? No. The Beholder is one of the single most powerful creations in the game. It is vicious. Second to probably really the dinosaurs, but they're not really out to be angry, whereas the Beholder, when it wants to get you, it wants to get you. So here we are back at this chart. So your bunch of characters might be 4th level. They're not going to really encounter a Beholder. As an example, a Beholder is listed as a level 10 monster, and rightfully so. Whilst they only have 1 attack that does 2 to 8 points of damage, everything else will just kill anyone under a certain... they just kill. And same thing with most big nasty demons and devils and so on. Whereas the Orcs are way down below. So should you be a 10th level party and you encounter some Orcs, you're not going to come across 7 to 12 Orcs. You're going to come across a ton of Orcs. potentially a full raiding party of 100 or about that. And you'll have to figure out how to do it, because there's enough there to actually still be able to do lots of damage. Again, this is where the points come through in terms of you don't just have to defeat in combat, you can find other ways to overcome the encounter. And that's what the experience points are for. You want to challenge your players, and Gygax once said, should a party of first levels encounter a vampire? Of course they could. Should they be able to defeat it? No. And back in the day, running was always an option. Always an option. When you're encountering something that's way too strong for you, it's time to hightail it. Since we're talking about vampires, let's have a look at one. So, they're pretty tough. Energy drain, all the charm, hit only by magic weapons, blah blah, wow, crazy. And they're worth the points. 3,800 plus 12 per hit point. So on average you're looking at about 40 to 50 hit points for a vampire. Now you're looking at 4,000 plus experience points, which is about a level 8 monster. So when you've got a party of 6 levels and you have to decide whether or not they're actually going to be able to take on that standard vampire, then you need to work out, okay, by the time they get to the vampire, what other challenges are they going to have been facing? Because are they going to be at full strength, half strength, and so on. So that party of 6 levels, they're going to really only encounter 8th levels at a very, very narrow. It would be a weak vampire. Still a vampire, but just be a weakened vampire in some way, or limited in power or limited in scope. Maybe it already had an encounter with something, who knows. You'd have to water it down, because even that sort of party would die, or lose more than they would gain. On the flip side, you would provide experience points akimbo for all the treasure that they find, should they decide to be able to take it out. And that's one of the things that made the Count von Strahd and Ravenloft so powerful, because Ravenloft was obviously, this is the base standard default, inverted commas, normal vampire. And if you added something extra to make it a little bit more powerful, then that all goes up. So if you wanted to make the vampire a magic user of 5th or 6th level on top of everything else, then suddenly it's going to be a level 9 or even a level 10 monster. So you need to be aware of that. And it's good when you play with these things, because someone just goes, oh, it's only this. Or, okay, but they don't know what you've done to bump it up. So that group of orcs, you go take out the orcs and there's an orc chieftain. The orc chieftain happens to be a half-orc fighter of 10th level that's walking around with 120 hit points. It's going to be just brutal. Alright, so before we go any further, I just want to come in with golden experience points. So the basic reason for all of this is that you need a reason it gives the characters a reason to obviously adventure. So what the DM's guide suggests is that convert all metal and gems and jewelry into a total value of gold pieces if the relative value of the monsters or guardian device, important, guardian device, fought or overcome equals or exceeds that of the party which took the treasure. Experience is awarded on a 1-for-1. If the guardian was weaker, then you bring it down, and so on. If a 10th level magic user takes 1000 GP off 10 kobolds, the relative strengths are 20 to 1 in favour of the magic user, and so therefore that's about it. Treasure has to be physically taken out, and so on. So he's also got a little bit of a caveat here. Players who balk at equating gold pieces to experience points should be gently but firmly reminded that in a game, certain compromises must be made, because we don't want them to just sort of I stay back in the monastery and scribe. We want them out and about, doing things, experimenting, playing, and so on. Fighters should be exercising riding, smiting, and that sort of thing. Tilting lists, yes, tawnies, we love a good tawny. Alright, so over on this chart here, we've got an example of a giant centipede with 2 hit points, has a basic XP value of 5, with an XP per hit point of 2, and an extra of 25 for the poison, which totals 32 experience points in the end. An owlbear with 30 hit points starts with the basic XP of 150, which goes up to 180 for the hit points, and then 75. A 10-headed Hydra, 80 hit points, goes up to a lot with the 900 base plus a total of 880, and then multiple attacks, and so on, totaling 2 and a bit thousand, and so on. An ancient spell using red dragon. It's important to note that they've got these specific examples in here, like for especially the Hydra and the dragons, because some of them don't have an experience point total in the monster entry, because they're varying hit points, they're varying levels, hit dice, and so on, and hit points per hit point and hit value. So you need to go through all of that. So for instance, the ancient spell using red dragon, that is huge, has 88 hit points and is broken down as 1300 plus another 1400 plus another 28 for the armor class, special defense, high intelligence, saving throw bonuses, and so on, and an extra of 2550 because it's got breath weapons, spell use, and attack damage of more than X value, and so on. So totaling 7758. So suddenly there's a ton of experience points. So when the party decide that they need to take out that beholder or that dragon, these things are party killers. By the time that the party get to them, they're going to be tired, they're going to be down by a third, if they're down by less than an X amount of hit points, and so on. So you need to take that into account when you're building these encounters, because it's easy to think, oh yeah, my party of 8th levels are all got 50 hit points and they're fine. But a couple of bad combats in a row, they could be down to less than half, and then suddenly when they hit the big bad, it's messy. And then you got to make compromises. So if you try and get it balanced, there are less compromises involved. But remember, each of these experience point rewards are for every ability, which is the reason why it's so many for the beholder. Just a small caveat for this next part, and this is really just the way how I calculate things, which means that we're moving away from the usual routine of me trying to not, tell people how to play or what to do. But I do like to use those experience point charts as ways for working out how difficult certain encounters, and not just matter of people, but also as in combatants, but also just general encounters that they have, or actions they need to take. When a fighter needs to bash down a door to get through, sometimes it's worth a few extra points. When they have an ingenious use for using thieving abilities or something along those lines, or every time when the assassin uses their ability to do something, I work out what it is for an experience points for what they're doing and how difficult it is and setting it up and so on. So when that assassin is perched on the rooftop and taking out certain targets, that's well and truly within scope, and they would get a few extra points for that because they're using their ability to do that. And I want to encourage my players to use their abilities as often as possible. So, and in different ways, in ingenious ways if they can, if they think about it. Which is why I go down the pathway of using things like hear noise as overall sensors as opposed to just a single hear noise. If you want to smell something, you get that. You taste, what the taste of this is, and so on. So I use the hear noise for that, because I imagine that thieves would have that sort of those skills brought up and as part of their training. And whenever you deal with experience points, the next question is all about levels and leveling up, which is the other thing that all of this the DM needs to have sorted. Yeah, so my feelings on all of that. The DM needs to make sure that we've got certain things arranged, so that way when the players get to a point, it's not, oh, okay, we'll deal with it later. It's a matter of, okay, I've got this plan and how we're progressing. Yep. Everyone goes up mid-level, as in the middle of the adventure. What do? We keep it as it is. Then at the end, we level up and we costs this, and we do it for this amount of time, and so on. Or not. But again, either way, the DM needs to work out what's been discarded and what's included. Alright, so hopefully today I've helped some folk. I know I've had a couple of questions about it, like I said, in various ways, and it is something that I've wanted to address for a while, because those two charts, people don't really look into them very often and have different ways of doing it. Part of the problem with the way that all of this is written, and you can make a small book just on part of the problems that are the way that these things are written. Gygax wrote with one thought, and that was to get what was in his mind on paper as fast and as efficient as possible. So we also need to sometimes extrapolate, which is fine, but that's up to each individual DM as to how these things work out. So hopefully we've covered some of the topics that people would like to see. If you have anything else that you would like to try and catch up with, obviously pop a note down below, subscribe and all that sort of nonsense. And look, thank you to the very few Patreons that have, I keep forgetting to plug that, by the way. It's very poor of me, isn't it, really? I should be plugging that more. But anyway, if you're Patreon and you've got a request, obviously I'll put that to the top of the queue, as well as offline conversations and so on. Alright, well, thank you so very much. I really enjoy doing these. It's great, and it's good to get the next one out. Alright, for everyone else who wants to, although you probably wouldn't have got to this part, but if you're like the other games that I've been doing, I've not abandoned them. I've just waiting for a few things to fall into place. What I really want to do is to organise a few games. In Melbourne, we've had lots of lockdowns, and so I've wanted to get some people in and get some actual games happening with people, as opposed to the lockdown variations. So that's what I'm just waiting for. So I haven't abandoned anything, haven't gotten anything out. It's a timing thing. Alright, thank you very much everyone. I appreciate all of your support.